I'm sure a lot of our Kaglobe here were very much involved during the midterm elections and what it could mean for us in 2025, 2028, and beyond. Everyone, let us all welcome Mr. Richard Haydarian.
Thank you very much. As you can see in my voice, medyo under the weather ako, so hindi ko masabayan yung energy level and all the colorfulness here. But it's definitely a pleasure to see a lot of old friends and new friends and a lot of other experts from different fields. One reason na under the weather ako is at the same time I'm getting all of these requests. Maybe you want to discuss Trump, maybe you want to discuss midterm elections, maybe you want to discuss the West Philippine Sea, and next thing you know, every night I have to stay awake until 3, 4 a.m. because of the US time, because I don't know which country is going to get hit next, or what's the next strike, or are we going to go into nuclear Armageddon? So that's why the age of uncertainty is really the theme. You call it disruption, I call it something else. It's beyond disruption. But very quickly in the next 30 minutes or so, I'm just going to give us a kind of a flavor of, or at least a framework of understanding what are the major points of disruption that we have to look at. So obviously, kasama dyan, Trump and tariffs, the ongoing conflicts, but I also want to talk about the Philippines on the domestic level. What should we do? And I think this is something very important. By the way, I'm glad that hindi nilagay na I'm glad that hindi na ako personal ng grata here last time I checked, and it's quite unfortunate that earlier this year there was a big misunderstanding, but I expressed my apology for unintended hurt some of our friends felt from the beautiful island of Mindanao regarding the issue of human development index. I think our great CEO here, who served a lot in Africa before, can tell us about comparison of human development index. So in short, I'm not going to talk about human development index today at all. I think I saw on Google Trends, millions of people already have researched that, so I'm going to skip that. But on a more serious note, actually what troubled me with that episode is that regionalism and tribalism seems to be a major challenge in our country. I come from Baguio. I'm a very proud Baguio boy. I was glad to hear about all of these beautiful developments and the bad internet we got there. Shout out to Mayor Magalong. Even though I come from Baguio, even though I was almost born in Marcos Highway, that never blinded me to the Marcos legacy. And I think my record is out there. And that's why I always felt in my own life, I have to walk the talk, meaning you don't allow your own regional ties define your own political views and understanding of facts. So it's quite, disheartening to me to see that in 2025, we're still stuck in this kind of a regionalistic understanding of politics. And why is that important? Because we live in an extremely uncertain and dangerous world. And if we don't stick it together as a whole nation, we don't enhance our own agency as a nation state, yari tayo dyan, right? Things are really troubling out there, and we're going to just scratch the surface in the next 25, 30 minutes or so. So I really hope that in the coming years, we develop a certain level of maturity in understanding politics, but also developing a sense of agency, and a sense that the Philippines has a lot of problems in the corporate world, in the political world, but we're no longer just a small country. We're a mid-sized country. We're a middle power. We have agency, and if we can get our act together, you might even thrive in this new era of uncertainty. So that's basically the cadence and the thrust of my presentation today and our discussion later on. So very quickly, I'm not going to do a whole semester of lecture on concepts of strategic hedging and agency. All I'm saying is that if you look at a lot of our neighbors, whether it's Vietnam or bigger, farther neighbors like India, these are countries that are engaged in what we call multi-alignment, right? Basically, they try to get the best out of every major relationship they got. So case in point is Vietnam. On one hand, they're getting all the BYD and high-quality investments from China. On the other hand, they also have strategic cooperation with the United States. They get their weapons from Russia. They also have their own free trade agreement with the European Union. It's called multi-alignment. The Indians have it even at a larger scale. They're part of the BRICS, together with China, Russia, and Iran. At the same time, of course, they're also part of the Quad, together with the United States, Japan, and all. On one hand, they're trying to get the Boeing engine technology. On the other hand, they want to get the S-400 weapon systems from the Russians and fifth-generation fighter. Now, obviously, each country has its own unique circumstances, but what I'm telling you is that a lot of our neighbors, countries who have similar levels of development, so if you look at per capita of Vietnam and India, it's very similar to ours. Slightly higher in the case of Vietnam, slightly lower in our case. So countries who are developmentally similar to us, I'm not going to talk about HDI, but who are developmentally similar to us, are showing a lot of dexterity, if not success, in terms of their geopolitical positioning. For instance, the last year we saw Vietnam alone hosting Biden, Putin, and Xi Jinping, right? That just tells you if you play your cards well, no one knows about the next 10, 20 years, but at least for now, you can put your country in a Goldilocks position to get the most out of all relationship. And that is why personally, I've always been open to discussing even sensitive issues with our American friends, with our Chinese friends, with our European friends. So having that kind of diversified, multi-aligned foreign policy is a sine qua non for any rising middle power, whether it's as big as India or a similar sized country as Vietnam. Now, of course, the reason why I keep on saying we cannot afford to be a divided country or to be driven by tribalism and regionalism and emotionality is because our geography is both our blessing but is also our curse. If you look at the Philippines today, we're right in the middle, almost exactly, of an emerging great power competition. So that's the first island chain, South China Sea, East China Sea, and the Taiwan Strait, and the second island chain, which is the Philippine Sea. These are two maritime areas that are being competed over by China and the United States. I'm not here to make value judgments about who's right and wrong. The China's position is very simple. The Romans back in the day dominated the Mediterranean as their imperial backyard. The Americans did the same with the Caribbean and the Pacific. Next thing you know, andito sila sa Pilipinas, and they built my beautiful city Baguio, right? So the Chinese are saying, why shouldn't we, as a superpower in our region, have that kind of dominance and hegemony in our adjacent waters? Well, the problem with that kind of imperial thinking is that you immediately, right, cut into the interests and sovereign rights of smaller countries, right? So Latin Americans paid the price, the Carthaginians paid the price in the case of Rome, and unfortunately now we're paying the price for this great power competition. And things are just gonna get worse as we move ahead. I can say that because over the past 10 years, probably I've written 1,000 articles on the South China Sea West Philippine disputes. Walang sawa, but actually I realize things are getting worse rather than better. Especially right now when the rules-based international order is looking more like a joke than an aspiration. Honestly, 2016, China treated our arbitration victory like nothing. They called it a piece of trash paper. Then Russia invades Ukraine based on the flimsiest pretext. And now the West is sleepwalking into a major conflict with a major country in the Middle East. I'm not sure what kind of rules-based order we have. You know, there used to be a joke about the Holy Roman Empire. That is neither holy, we can talk about Austrian erotic imperial life, neither was it an empire, because the Austria-Hungarian Empire was not really that powerful, right? And so neither holy nor Roman nor imperial, right? And some people are saying maybe we're also in the same era whereby we neither have clear rules nor an international order to speak of. And that's extremely worrying. And that's why, again, I'm saying we have to get our act together. And I hope we transcend this kind of particularism and regionalism that has been defining and bedeviling our politics for quite so long. Now, having said that, again, I'm not here to pass value judgment. The reality is that on one hand, China wants to develop its own spheres of influence here. On the other hand, we're a US treaty ally, and we're seeing the emergence of a much more assertive America, if not a unilateralist America. Again, that's a very dangerous combination. We have no time to go through the whole history of that. All I can say is that we have been doing 50 shades of hedging and playing between the two superpowers over the past 10 years alone. In fact, you can compare Duterte 2016 to 2018 versus Duterte 2020 to 2022, completely iba yung policies. Why? Because we're struggling. You know, anyone who says, alam kong dapat gawin ng Pilipinas ABC, they don't know what they're talking about. Because as we speak, the ground is shifting. So you cannot have a policy for this situation because the situation is shifting as we speak. So we're constantly calibrating and recalibrating, and that's the kind of difficulty that we face as a country. Having said that, it doesn't mean we're helpless. It doesn't mean we're helpless. As we become a $1 trillion GDP economy, we'll have more and more resources to finally invest in our defensive capabilities. Now, I'm not saying let's go North Korea and invest 70% of our GDP. I've been to North Korea and I tell you I don't want to, I mean, they have great kimchi better than South Korea, but definitely you don't want to go down the road, right? Nor the Soviet Union way, which is unsustainable. But we're barely spending a single percent of our GDP on our defensive capability, when countries as big as China are spending 4, 5, 6% of their GDP by some accounts, or at least 2 to 3%. Russia is already going to go double digit. So in that world, relatively, it doesn't make sense for us to so much neglect our basic defensive capability. So I'm all for independent foreign policy, but you have to embody that in capabilities. Kaya sabi ko, yung friends to all, enemy to none, pang Department of Tourism po yan. Right? Guys, I love the Philippines, yun na lang lagay nyo. You cannot act friends to people who act like enemies to you, right? And you have to make sure your friends respect you so that they invest in their alliance with you. Because if your warships look like a joke, you have no really fighter jets to talk about, no one is willing to stand by you because they know you cannot stand by yourself, right? So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So naturally, as our economy becomes bigger, we are more than 100 million people, we'll have more resources. Yes, I know in many sectors things are stagnating, but relatively speaking, for the first time in 30 years, Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia are growing faster than China. Now, that doesn't mean we're at the same level, per capita-wise, they're twice higher than us. But the thing is that Southeast Asia is having its second moment of growth, second moment of reemergence. And I think that's something that is worth taking into account. And if you look at it, the Philippines in many ways is a middle power. I've heard a lot of things about Mexico. I'll be careful about saying something I might get persona non grata in Mexico. But no one says Mexico is a small country, right? They say a lot of things about Mexico. Well, guess what? Our population is almost as big as Mexico. And at the rate we're going to be easily among the top 10 largest populations on Earth. We're number 13 right now. So if you look at everything, it shows you one thing, which is we're not a small country. So I'm sick and tired when I hear Philippines as a small power. I mean, if you want to play the David versus Goliath thing, I don't know if you've seen the David statue in Florence. Actually, it's quite, it's quite a fit, strong-looking man. But David doesn't mean mukha kang kawawa and paawa effect. It means you have the basic capabilities. And indeed, we can become that David if we can put a couple of things together. Now, very quickly, I'll just go to the challenges we face moving forward. So these are just, these are flavor of the challenges we have, right? Look at it. It's not just the West Philippine Sea. It's also the Taiwan crisis, right? Look at our bases like Mavulis, how close they are to Taiwan, right? I remember when I was a kid, I would go to Pagotpot with my family. I could hear the Taiwanese radio, right? If you go to Mavulis, where we have a naval base, it's closer to Taiwan than northern Filipino provinces like Cagayan, for instance, right? So our geography is also our source of potential conflict. And that's why yung idea na blessing yung geography natin, we're protected by waters, that's gone. Now the waters are being contested over. Therefore, our maritime zones are also a potential source of friction, if not worse. Add to that is this situation. We have the two most powerful political dynasties in the countries going at it. Although it's not as straightforward, right? Because I don't know where Amy Marcos really stands in this equation, but forget about it, let's move forward. And then there are other also chismis within each camp that I don't have time to go into, but baka ma-libel din tayo. But you get one point. What's happening in the Philippines, and that's why the 2025 election was pretty unique, is that you have this US-China rivalry, and then you have two dynasties in the Philippines fighting, each of them with different orientation, to put it mildly, right? Clearly, both Biden and Trump are happy with Marcos. You have no idea how many world leaders I've met or top leaders I've met, and they're all praises for Marcos Jr. Like saying, what are you seeing that we don't see? Anyway, they're so impressed. Like, he's so amazing. It's like, okay, whatever. Okay, maybe he's not a good vlogger, but apparently he's a good statesman. Whether look at talks in Germany and Australia, among others. And then, of course, as far as the Dutertes are concerned, I think finally Sara Duterte had a statement on West Philippine Sea for the first time in 3 years as a VP and the first time ever as a politician, right? And then medyo sablay pa. Something, let's just be in the middle, right? But what I'm saying here is that this is a unique situation of two-level contestation, right? Which we never had, and that's why it was quite alarming when your NBI, your PNP, your different security agencies were openly saying, may nahuhuli kami mga tao na galing sa China or related sa China na may ginagawang kalokohan. If you look at the report by ASPI, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, yung mga bangag-bangag video, right? Or some of the videos about the president supposedly provoking the military to go into war, they trace it back to China. As early as 2019, I had an article on that. There were China-based troll farms pushing for Duterte, Sara. So, now, none of this means the other side is not doing mumbo-jumbo stuff too, right? All I'm saying is that this is real. We are kind of like Berlin of mid-20th century. We're at the front line. In fact, some would say the best spies of China are already here because they look at the Philippines as the emerging new frontline state. And the Americans are also very invested here. Did you see how nice Pete Hegseth was when he was here in the Philippines? They would talk to President Marcos. We love you. President Trump has a lot of respect. So the Americans actually are also very invested in the Philippines because they see us as a critical ally on both the Taiwan question and the broader competition with China and South China Sea in the first and second island chain. So, in short, wala tayong room for complacency or for just being parochial and internally oriented. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Now, speaking of Trump, what we're seeing with President Trump, we can have a long debate with our friends among MAGAs, but it looks like the MAGAs themselves are having fights right now. I don't want to get into that. But what we learned from history over the past 100 years is that it's so hard to create peace and to bring down tariffs. It's so easy to raise tariffs and destroy peace, right? You know how many years it took for the world to get out of the depression and the beggar the neighbor policies of 1920s and 30s, including this Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. You know how difficult it was for us to, over a century, since 1926, for us to create the rules of the game whereby war is not a legitimate basis for conquest or foreign policy goals. Right? You know how hard it was for us in ASEAN to make sure that we end the era of confrontasy whereby Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, or Philippines, Malaysia could go to war over territorial disputes. You know how difficult that was. For everything we can say about how UN is a top shop, ASEAN is the top shop, the rules-based international order is a joke, the reality is that we have achieved so much in the past 100 years compared to what was happening the previous 5,000 years, right? And that's why we're worried with how things are going right now. Because now, suddenly, you're having every major economy, both China and US, going double-digit, triple-digit tariffs. And we know historically, once you raise the tariffs, it's very hard to bring them down because you already create constituencies invested in that. And politically, it doesn't look good. So no matter what claims Trump is making about, we have a deal with this country or that, none of them are for sure. The Europeans are preparing for a showdown. The Koreans and Japanese are not showing any room for compromise. They have free trade agreements with the US in the case of South Korea. The Mexicans are standing up. The Canadians, the nicest people on earth, are talking about elbows up. I mean, this is a crazy situation we're talking about, right? This is unprecedented. Now, for my MAGA friends, I know their basic arguments that this is the madman logic, right? You just have to be completely unpredictable and use all the cards you have, and then you can get concessions from other countries. What they don't realize is that this is not the first time we had Trump. Trump is very predictable. It's unpredictably predictable, right? I mean, the whole idea with Trump is that he has a clear strategic goal, which is to restore American manufacturing, right? Make America, a strong industrial economy again, but his tactics are always this kind of obfuscation and back and forth. So basically people are saying, we're just going to get through the drama, and eventually if you hold your ground, you can prevail, right? So the other thing that is also troubling right now is not only how Trump is just setting precedents or breaking precedents after precedents, it's also this internal debates we're seeing among different groups, restrainers versus primacists, and now the return of hawks, who the other day successfully pushed for an American strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. And then you also have the situation of oligarchy, which has added more uncertainty. Like people like Elon Musk being buddy-buddy with Trump one day, the next day they're mortal enemies, talking about Epstein files, the next day they're quiet and don't say anything. I mean, this is creating a kind of internal drama and uncertainty we didn't have in the US ever, last time we checked in history, right? Not to mention clear cases of conflict of interest. Some people are saying, remember back in the day, Gorbachev, when he was in the US, said what an amazing country, all of their, supermarket and all. Hopefully one day would be like them. The joke now is that the US is looking more like Moscow, whereby you have one, big boss and then all of these oligarchs around him looking for concessions, right? Now, having said that, what are the implications for the Philippines? I'll just quickly go through that. Well, the first thing we don't know is which version of Trump 2.0 we're going to get. Is it the Trump light or the maximalist Trump, right? Because a Trump light is aggressive tactical negotiations, but at the end of the day, you settle on something that more or less somewhere in the middle and manageable, or can this get out of control? This dilemma applies both to geopolitics, including the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, but also applies to trade negotiations that are ongoing. Now, if you look at the different countries in ASEAN have different kind of challenges when dealing with Trump. But in the case of the Philippines, our advantages is our disadvantage. We really don't export much goods and manufacturing to the United States. So just like how the Asian financial crisis in 1997 didn't hurt us that much because we're not that integrated, it's very possible that because we just have very few really goods exports to the US, we can hold it together so long as we protect our services sector, BPO industry. That's why a big part of our discussion right now is how will the BPO industry deal with it? And in fact, the jury is still out. Some would say, thanks to POGOs getting out and real estate coming down, actually there could be a room for the BPO to actually have revival. Others are saying because of the AI challenge, maybe the BPO will have problems with retaining its momentum. So the jury is still out on that. So in short, in the case of the Philippines, it's much more 50-50 than a lot of our neighbors. If you're Vietnam or Cambodia, who are really reliant on goods and industries export, you're worried about any tariff. While in the case of the Philippines, it's a much more complicated situation. Now, so how do we respond to that? My suggestion for the Philippines is that we have to really discard complacency and leverage our geoeconomics. So one of the ideas that we can do is that to present the Philippines as a reliable, China-free partner. So we're the second largest producer of nickel in the world and the only major producer that is not dominated by Chinese mining companies. You go to Indonesia, you go to cobalt in Africa, you go to lithium in Chile, they're all dominated, the whole supply chain is Chinese. Not in the case of nickel in the Philippines. Semiconductors is another area where we can have actually position ourselves as a reliable co-producer or partner in a US-led supply chain or China-free supply chain, assuming we want to go down that road. I'm saying that because we have this Luzon economic corridor under which we're supposed to attract tens of billions of dollars of investment from the Japanese and Americans, but also from other important Western partners. Now, very quickly on this point, I think this is a time whereby not only we should not be complacent, we should also push the boundaries of policy discussion in the country. One of the things that I strangely do not hear here, but I hear in Germany, in US, and definitely in Japan and others, is the concept of industrial policy. Industrial policy for the 21st century. I keep on hearing about inflation, which is obviously important, macroeconomic prudential policies, of course it's important, but we have to go to the next level. What can we do to attract investments aside from whining politically, right? And that's where you need industrial policy. Now, industrial policy in the 21st century will be different from industrial policy in the 20th century. There are 4 letter S that I think we have to keep in mind. One is specialization. You cannot have an industrial policy to make cars, semiconductors, and you choose one and you focus on that. Number 2, there has to be clear supervision. This was a problem we had during the Marcos dictatorship, for instance. Cronies will got all the subsidies and funding, but it's not performance-based. Next thing you know, kung saan napunta yung pera and then bankrupting country. We cannot have that kind of industrial policy. Third, there has to be synergy. Private-public partnership is extremely important. For instance, BBM, friends with Aboitiz, Ayala, etc., they can work together, sit down, and look at ways whereby in what specialized sectors they can work together. Let's say, for instance, Luzon Economic Corridor, we want to bring in manufacturing. Mahaling electricity, maybe Aboitiz can help you with this. Maybe Ayala can help you with that. That kind of approach is extremely important. And fourth, creating all of these support mechanisms, including, I would argue, subsidies for power, which I mentioned a while ago. Now, very quickly, the good thing is, other countries are seeing our value. Japan, for instance, is highly invested in the Philippines. They'll be one of the biggest investors in the Luzon Economic Corridor, our subway, our basic infrastructure. But the Europeans are paying very much attention to us. I was just with the Foreign Office folks, with the French, among others, the other month. I'm heading back to Europe soon, again, for conversation. Different countries in Europe are interested in us, not only geopolitically, because of the West Philippines dispute, but also economically, because they recognize we have not been given the attention and we have a lot of dynamism and a lot of momentum that was not there before. And in fact, as we speak, we're in line to sign a free trade agreement with the European Union that would generate billions of dollars of new trading opportunities in the coming years. Okay, which brings you really to midterm elections in the Philippines. To be honest, the midterm elections for me just created more uncertainty because no one won. Everyone won and everyone lost, right? BBM, obviously, he admitted that he got way fewer seats in the Senate than he expected. Although I don't really know how to count Camille Villar in the alignment, especially with the impeachment issue coming up. The Pink movement would have hoped sana nagpatakbo sila ng more people. I mean, sana si Sheldon tumakbo, sana siniport din natin si a couple of other candidates. But Bam and Kiko did very well in top 5 candidates. So suddenly now people are saying maybe for Aquino to get 20 million votes tells you maybe there's something there. There's a Pink movement. And then with the Duterte side, they got way more votes than some people expected based on the surveys or some of the faulty surveys. But nevertheless, getting 4 or 5 votes would not give you a guarantee, especially a guarantee to prevent a trial. Because the whole elections, midterm elections, was an existential challenge for the Dutertes, right? Because depending on what will be the constitution of the upcoming Senate and the alignments and realignments, that will determine if there will be a trial to begin with and what kind of trial. My short take on that, and I have very long, extensive take with legal experts and luminaries. I'll have Justice Carpio later and also on my podcast to really break down this issue. It really goes down to whether you'll have a real impeachment whereby they'll go to show me the money trail, right? And yung mga recibos, amigimanga, and all of that. Because my contention is that if we reach that point in any real trial, that's the number that matters, right? Remember, the last time there were senators who tried to block a proper trial or tried to shield a seemingly guilty president, in the case of Estrada, a lot of them never came back politically. Like Nikki Cossetec, for instance, right? Remember those 11 senators, right? So this could be very politically explosive depending on whether the trial will happen to begin with, right? And if it happens, I think the numbers that matters is the public opinion numbers. And that will also shape how the senators who will also care about their own self-preservation respond. Again, my argument is very simple. Of course, we don't want destabilization and political instability. But we cannot also be a banana republic, because last time I checked, find me a single country in the entire Asian continent, if not the Eurasian landmass, whereby the vice president openly comes out and says, I'm going to assassinate the president and the vice, and no joke, right? You don't have anything like that. So if you want the Philippines to be a more respectable, attractive country, you need accountability, and those things are extremely important. But more importantly, I'm not here to just give you the latest event-mentiel analysis. The long-term trend is also very important. I think there was just good enough outcome from the 2025 elections for us to realize that Philippine politics could be on an inflection point, right? The youth vote, we don't have real exit polls. But from the preliminary data I'm seeing, it looks like the youth, especially the Gen Zs, is introducing some sort of uncertainty. Just count the number of washed-up artistas who wanted to make the Senate once again a retirement home and how it didn't work for them, right? Should I name them one by one? May isang nakalusot.
Yes.
May isang nakalusot, but he's exactly the reason why no one wants more of that nakalusot, right? So maybe there's something there. I mean, for an Aquino to get 20 million votes, for Kiko Pangilinan to get more than 50 million votes for his food vlogs, right? Ito ang low, right? Ito ang Senado. That tells you maybe there's something there. And speaking of maybe there's something there, imagine we're lucky not to only have someone like Vico Soto, but there are thousands of other Vico Sotos across the country that we're not paying attention to. And I'm so glad we have someone like Vico Soto with the moral compass who said, why do you want me to run for another office after this? That's laughing politics, right? This is the kind of principled, charismatic politics that we never had in our country, but we have had in our region. Thailand, just the other year, almost elected the prime minister, just a few years older than some of us, 41 years old. I'm talking about Pita. Pita eventually was prevented from becoming the prime minister because of the military and Thaksin and all of them coming together. But now, based on my understanding, he's in the US recruiting all of these Ivy League Thai experts, and he wants to bring them back and have another run. So their party used to be called Future Forward, Move Forward. They're going to make another name. They keep on getting banned, and they keep on coming back, and they keep on coming back stronger. By mobilizing the youth, by using data analytics, by mobilizing people, exciting people. If Thailand can do that, why can't we? Considering, thankfully, we don't have a crazy monarch or a crazy military, right?
Yeah.
We have so much more opportunity than Thailand and we have so much more talent, right? Raw political talent, analytics talent that we can put together. So for me, that is why I'm still cautiously optimistic. despite all of these short-term to medium-term uncertainties, the potential is there and the urgency also is there. And if we put those two things together, I think we move in the right direction. So last thing, go big or lose home. That's the mindset nowadays. If you don't fix your mess at home, you're going to be eaten alive by your bigger neighbors. Because we're entering kind of an old school world order whereby each major power is trying to impose their will and hegemony in their respective region. Second, it's development policy. Very important. We should go beyond this usual discussion about just inflation and economic growth. Those are very crude indicators of economic growth and development. We have to look at something more than that. Are we creating enough manufacturing? Are we reviving our agricultural sector? Are we creating food security? Can we take care of our energy security if things go crazy in the Strait of Hormuz in the coming days or weeks? Those are things whereby we cannot be just on standby mode. We have to take care of our own fate. And lastly, the rise, fall, and re-rise of the pink movement. This is something that we have to watch out. Again, pink movement for me is just a kind of a catchphrase for this liminal, just sensibility for a Philippines that is neither this nor that, right? And I think if we get our act together, right? If we just look at also the positive points and glass half full, and also keep on betting on and engaging the Gen Zs, I'm very optimistic about the direction of this country because there's no other choice. on that cautiously optimistic note, I look forward to just a few violent reactions and looking forward to the rest of the discussion today. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat and apologies again on the